Hey, all, today we're going to continue talking about trigonometry. And today we're going to talk about doing the inverse of what we did last time. Inverse is another way to say opposite. So inverse means opposite. We had the sine, cosine, and tangent ratios, functions last class. Today we have the inverse functions. They have this little -1 exponent. What that means is inverse. And so sine, cosine, and tangent last lesson showed us what was the ratio between two side lengths. The inverse sine, cosine, and tangent takes a ratio and tells us what angle are those side lengths related to. And so we're going to use inverse trigonometry to find an angle measure in a right triangle. So you can see in this first problem, we are looking to find this angle measure. And so we can label the sides opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse the same way we did in the last lesson. So my hypotenuse is across from the 90-degree angle. I like to find that one first. The angle that I'm interested in is always being made by the hypotenuse and the adjacent side. So this angle is being made by these two sides. We know this is the hypotenuse, and that means this is the adjacent side. The one that is next to is the adjacent. And then the last one is the opposite side, the one that is across from the angle that we're looking for. And so we can set this up the same way we did last lesson when we were trying to find a missing side length. We have O and A. Let's remind ourselves that sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So we know in this triangle how long the opposite side is. We also know how long the adjacent side is. That's O and A. And so we are going to choose tangent. We are going to say the tangent. I'm not using the inverse yet. We're going to say the tangent of our angle question mark. We always put the angle next to the function is equal to the opposite side, which is 18, divided by the adjacent side, which is 32. And so when we're doing algebra, when we're solving equations, we know that we have opposite operations. So opposite operations. Some opposite operations are addition and subtraction, multiplication and division. We've added some opposite operations this year. Squaring and square rooting, those are opposite operations. Inverse trig functions, these sine, cos, tan to the -1, that is the opposite of doing the regular sine, cos, and tan. So they cancel each other out. So if I want to cancel out tangent right here and be left with question mark, which is our angle, we can use tan inverse. And whatever we do to one side of an equation, we must do to the other side of the equation. So we're going to do the tan inverse of this whole fraction. And so what happens here is tan inverse and tan cancel each other out. So we're left with this question mark, which is my angle measure. And then over here, we have something that we can use Desmos to find, tan inverse of 18 over 32. We are going to ask the calculator what angle is related to the opposite over the adjacent side being 18 over 32. So we always want to make sure that our calculator is in degree mode. So we click the wrench and make sure degrees is grayed out. And then we can go to our functions and choose tan inverse. It even says inverse trig functions. And we can put our fraction in there. And we can get a angle measure. We'll call it 29.4 degrees. So the setup is pretty similar to what we did before, but we just have to use this new idea of the inverse function to cancel out sine, cosine, or tangent and find the angle measure. So let's look at this next one. I'm going to label this as my hypotenuse across from 90. That makes this my adjacent side because it's next to the angle. And then 7 then is my opposite. So I look and I see that I know how long my opposite side is. I know how long my hypotenuse is. That means we're going to be looking at sine. So we can use the sine function to help us solve this. We're going to say sine of our angle question mark is equal to our opposite side, 7, divided by our hypotenuse, 16. We want to cancel out sine so that we have question mark, our angle measure, all by itself. So I'm going to do the sine inverse of both sides. I believe it's important to do all these steps. Sine inverse and sine cancel each other. We have question mark left over. And now we have something we can put into the calculator, sine inverse of 7 over 16. Which is, we're going to call it 26. We'll round 25.9 to 26 degrees. And these are angle measures. We're doing this in degrees, and so we should label the angles with a little degree symbol. We'll do one more. I have an extra one there that you can do perhaps if you are stuck before you go along to the U-tries. We always want to label our hypotenuse across from the 90. The side that's next to my angle, that's not the hypotenuse, is my adjacent side, and then we have the opposite. In this triangle, we know how long the adjacent side is. We know how long the hypotenuse is. That is cosine. So the cosine of our angle that we don't know is our adjacent side, 46, divided by our hypotenuse, 54. To solve this thing, we're going to do the cosine inverse of both sides so that we cancel out cosine and we're left with our variable that represents our angle measure that we're looking for. So cosine inverse and cosine will cancel. We're left with our angle measure question mark. And on the right side, that is something we can use Desmos to help us find. This represents a degree measure. We just need to ask the calculator to tell us what it is. So we're doing the cosine inverse of 46 over 54. And we're getting, we'll call it 31.6 degrees. So I just want to make a note, a place where we can make a mistake and do a lot of really good work and get an answer that is not the answer we're looking for. We have to set up our O, A, and H correctly, because if we get O and A switched around, we are going to end up finding the sine of our angle, and it's going to give us a different angle measure. We'll still get an angle measure that looks like it could be correct. In fact, we'll get the other angle measure. We would end up finding this angle measure by accident. And so we're doing something that's not totally wrong, but it's not what we're looking for. So we got to make sure that we set up OA and H correctly. So if you're struggling with that, it's a good time to ask how we can fix that so that you can apply that to all the rest of the triangles and make your life a little bit easier. So if you're feeling confident, go ahead and try these two problems and then check your answer. So go ahead and check your answers here. If you got one or both wrong, that's okay. Now is the time to ask for help. Ask one of us for help. If you got the answers that look like degrees, but they're not the same, so this one might be 49.7, or if you got 68.7, I believe. If you got either of those answers, that means you probably labeled your O and A incorrectly. So if you did that, that might be where your mistake was, but you should still ask for help. I'm going to cross those out because they're not the right answers. After you've asked for help, you've got an okay understanding of what you're doing. Now's the time to practice. That's where we build up the understanding. So do your practice. And as ever, if you need us, we're glad to help you.